Let's see. The budget presentation. We're not voting on this. This is just a presentation.
Correct. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, members of the public who are still hung around, those who are watching online. I'm Indy Adams, your town manager, and I'll be taking over this presentation with our CFO, Director of Finances, Lisa Oaks. So to start with the summary, we'll go over our budget overview, our budget timeline, budget impacts, our proposed budget, which will include revenues and expenditures, department highlights, and goal alignment with our strategic plan and comp plan, and then our next steps in the budget process. So next step, starting with our budget background. The town has a budget because the state mandates it. They mandate that localities pass a balanced budget. Unlike the federal government, we have to provide a balanced budget. We also provide a line item budget for our council to adopt. There are other types of budgets traditionally that other local governments can adopt or work towards, which are program budgets as well as participatory budgets. We still have a line item budget, and that's kind of the base level budget that are required by local government. Next slide. Some background. What is our current real estate tax rate? Currently, this is a question that's come up. Currently, our real estate tax rate is 80 cents per $100 of assessed. Town residents pay 47 cents to the county. And then I've also been asked a question as it relates to the value of a penny. And currently at our reassess rate, the value of a penny equals to $60,854.38. I'll now kick it over to Lisa for the next few slides.
What is in our current budget? Excuse me. Our current budget fiscal 22 amended is $8,749,970.26. Of that budget, the general government funds are $6,594,240.26, and the contributions to the school for fiscal 22 is $2,155,730. The total school budget for fiscal 22 is $8,319,648, and that includes the contribution from the town. Next slide. We are in a reassessment process this year. The county has reported reassessments yielding a 12.9%, 92% growth on average for real estate assessed values that were effective January 1st of this year. Our current tax rate is 80 cents. The town staff and our legal counsel, we've calculated the equalization rate at 71 cents. Our operational costs are on the rise, and the increase to our required local match to our school system this year is estimated to exceed $500,000. This was calculated by the Virginia Department of Education. We're going to India.
Just taking a look at our budget timeline, we obviously started our budget process back in January, where we provided budget guidelines to staff and started to receive budget requests. At that time, we received almost over $900,000 worth of budget requests / enhancement. In February, we reviewed those requests. We worked on our forecast and did some of our reassessment analysis. In March, myself and the CFO met with the superintendent of schools and realized that the schools required local match is now going to be $2.6 million, which represents that approximately $500,000 increase, which Lisa just mentioned. Also in this process, we've worked through our CIP, working with our planning commission, which adopted our CIP on March 31st. Looking into April, we obviously had our presentation from our superintendent of schools at our April workshop. Today, we are presenting our proposed budget to town council. On May 4th, we will hold a public hearing on the budget. On May 15th, the school will adopt their budget. And then on May 18th, we will be asking for council to adopt the tax rate as well as the budget and approve the budget and appropriations and hold our hearing on the tax rate that day as well. Next, just a high level on some of our budget impacts. Again, we've heard about some state budget uncertainty. Many of you know the General Assembly has not proposed the final budget adoption for the governor. There are also some potential cuts to our sales tax that can negatively impact our revenues. There are also significant unfunded mandates coming from the state, especially as it relates to our schools. Lisa just mentioned there's an increase to the town's required local contribution to the schools that is estimated to exceed $500,000 as calculated by the Virginia Department of Education.
To the side is showing the budgets that were presented by the school board for fiscal 22 and 23. As you can see, the significant increase the school is asking for in fiscal 23, and part of that is because of the rise in state mandates or state funding. Next slide. Our required local match is up $467,684 from fiscal 22 at this time. That could also change. Just want to point that out. Why? State mandates that state mandates and state reduced funding to localities. The categories that they have changes in: compensation supplement wasn't funded in fiscal 22 at all. The state mandated requirement this year is now $90,128. There's a new incentive program for fiscal 23 labeled Rebenchmarking Hold Harmless. It's a state mandated program. Our required local match for that is $57,815. Infrastructure and operations was totally funded state program in 22. Now in the fiscal 22, the state mandate is requiring that the local localities pick up the total cost. That's $79,153. There was a 5% COLA increase in the state mandate for instructors. Next slide. Just wanted to point out our debt service payment for the elementary school. It's our highest debt service payment upcoming in fiscal 23, $487,820.
There are also some other budget impacts that have hit our budget this year. The schools had a 10% increase in their healthcare. On our side of the house, there's been a 9% increase in healthcare, up from the previous year, totaling $54,543. We've also discussed some of the implications of inflation. We, as local government, are not insulated from some of these cost increases that we have seen nationally. There's significant budget impacts on police and public works due to fuel needed for fleet and public works related to goods and materials. One example is our biosolids removal, which is our sludge, has increased $42,500 from the previous fiscal year, which represents a 106% increase. Another increase to mention, our E911 services that are paid directly to Westmoreland County has also increased $41,741 for our dispatch services. Next, this slide just will depict some of the differences between the cost of living adjustments. If you take a look at the orange stack bar, you will see the 5% increase to schools in fiscal year 2022. And this year, the schools are proposing a 6% increase for fiscal year 2023. If you take a look at that compounded over the 2 years, that's about an 11% increase in comparison to just the proposed 2% increase this year for our staff, which is all we will be able to propose in our current budget at our 78 cents, coupled with the 1% from the previous year. I would like to point out that long-term, this has implications on staff morale and retention if general government cannot sustain competitive pay. Next, as it relates to the population, just wanted to show graphically some of the population increases over the last decade since the last census. We have pointed out that there's been a 10.3% population growth since the last census, which has some impacts to our needs for services, as well as demands for our residents as well. Now we will jump into our proposed budget. Before we jump into the specifics, I just wanted to highlight that the town has recently adopted our strategic action plan, which talks about our mission, which is to provide services and build a better community. Our values as an organization are integrity, open and responsive communications, inclusivity, financial responsibility, balance, professionalism, consistency, respect, sustainability, resiliency, and trust. Town Council has also prioritized several goal areas, which are infrastructure, public safety, livability and placemaking, economic development, and government performance. As we go through this budget, you will see our budget alignment and our priorities in alignment with these goal areas. So strategically through this process, I've looked specifically at proposing staffing changes in alignment with the goal areas to be able to accomplish what Town Council has set out in our plan.
And this slide shows the revenue projections for fiscal 23 at $8.8 million. And you can see where the bulk of our revenue comes from is more than half of our revenue stream is real estate taxes. Then that is the bulk of our thing. So when you're looking at that rate, that means a lot to our budget. If you can see, everything else is very insignificant compared to that 57%. The next highest percentage is intergovernmental revenues. Those are things like your PPTRA, that's your personal property tax relief, the state highway funds that we get to maintain our streets, and our law enforcement 599 funds that we get. The next slide shows our proposed budget for expenditures, where we're spending that money at. And you can see that our highest expenditures is the school. We spend 30% of our budget on the school system. Go to the next one. So here are some key takeaways there. You're looking at budget-wise, the increases, the school from fiscal 22 to our requirement for fiscal 23 is a 22% increase. Our healthcare costs, as India mentioned, have gone up 9%. Our workers' comp costs have gone up 48%. Our general liability and our property insurance have gone up 5%. The dispatch services at Westmoreland County, our E911, 10%. Biosolids removal went up 106% in next year. Fireworks, for our 2 fireworks shows, have gone up 14%. And our janitorial supplies that we use to keep the trash cans with trash bags in them and clean the bathrooms and supply toilet paper and paper towels and porta johns, 120% increase. And then we have presenting a sample real estate on the assessed values at the different rates. So this is based on $100,000 value. As you can see, the monthly impact of the different amounts at 80 would be $9, at 78 at $7, so roughly a $2 difference. Average, if you said the average home was about $250,000, you're looking at $258 an annual increase at the proposed 78 cents.
Just to highlight again on staff retention and recruitment, about 10 years ago in the field of public administration, there was a lot of conversations around the Great Resignation, which is essentially the baby boomer generation getting to the point of retirement. We are now there. There was also no indication that a global pandemic would happen, which would push people out of the public sector as well, which has also happened. So public sector recruitment and retention has become even more challenging. And even though we are a small town, we are not insulated from these trends. This graphic that you see on the right was an article from the Times Magazine. This is just one magazine that has highlighted the issues as it relates to public sector hiring problems and what that means for us. It's quite daunting, and not that I want to be doom and gloom, but I think as the manager, it is important for me to bring these to your attention, that the public sector's hiring problem is a problem for us all, even at big localities, small localities, and everything in between. Here locally, I've been exploring with King George County Economic Development Director a concept around an apprenticeship program, which has really been grown out of the necessity because of the difficulty to hire people in some of these hardest to fill positions, which includes our water service authority on the King George side, which would be our wastewater treatment plant here in the town, CDL drivers, heavy equipment operators, and this is consistent in King George, other localities in Westmoreland, Richmond counties, towns such as Warsaw, Rappahannock, we all have the same struggles. So we have to get creative and innovative about ways that we're looking to recruit and plan in the future. The city of Austin, Texas, which is a huge locality, had 20 people in their water department walk out and/or through retirements, and they were unable to run their operations, which led to a boiled notice for a good portion of their city. So for cities like the city of Austin, who are having issues in just their water plant, in the future, if we don't begin to make significant increases in some of our wages that are extremely low, we will have significant issues in the future, which could potentially mean you will not be able to run certain positions in your public works department and your public utilities. And this is reality for local governments moving forward. Specifically here, King George and King George has talked to us about their challenges to recruit because places like Sheets are offering entry-level positions in food service at $16 and $17 an hour. We are not there. So we have to, as local government, begin to work towards incremental steps towards meeting basic minimum wage requirements. By January 1st, 2023, we have to be at $12 for every position. We are mostly there. There are some part-time positions that were at $11.67, so we have to look at that. And then by 2025, we have to be at $13.50, and by 2026, we have to be at $15 based on the current state standards. Moving on, our budget has been built on sound budgeting fiscal practices in accordance with our newly adopted financial policies. We have a balanced budget, which means our revenues equal expenditures. It is structurally balanced, which means one-time revenues are leveraged in support of non-reoccurring expenses. No transfers from unassigned fund balance was used to balance this budget. We do have a capital improvement plan, which is connected to our budget and our future financial plans. And then we have leveraged ARPA for infrastructure and essential workers. Next, making investments in our organization as it relates to staff retention and recruitment. We've made some market adjustments as it relates to some of those positions, the hardest to fill positions in public safety, healthcare costs that we mentioned, and then additional course positions in public safety. As it relates to highlights by goal area, as it relates to public safety, we are proposing one additional sergeant, one additional patrol officer, and a part-time parking attendant, which has been something that I've heard over the last year that we need someone dedicated to parking, and I would agree with that, which is why we've included that in our proposed budget. We're also planning in the future for our grant funding that will continue for our SRO, but we are in our final year of that grant, so that's something we're going to have to plan for in the future in collaboration with our schools. We have enhancements for equipment in our police vehicles, funding for new hire uniforms, which was not budgeted for before, funding for our lexical software, and then funding for ammunition. I just want to highlight some of the crucial pieces of the police department's request as it relates to supervisors in their leadership. Many of you remember the event where the officer was shot at not too long ago, and that was an incident where that officer was on call and on duty by himself with no supervisor on duty. Our police department is very, very thin. In that incident that night, he essentially had no one to look to in terms of a supervisory role that night. So these are core positions to be able to continue our essential functions as government. And it's really unfair to be able to put our officers in positions where they don't have any support. So as we look to highlight our public safety as well as support our police department, this was one crucial position that we decided had to be in this proposed budget. We also included overtime budgeted for police as well as public works, which I'll get to next. And we also included case study related adjustments from the police case study that was conducted last year. Next, as it relates to infrastructure, we are proposing a capital projects coordinator, which will be funded by ARPA. We have now a CIP that has been identified for the next 5 years, which totals about $23 million. In order for us to get these projects completed within that time frame, it is essential to have one dedicated FTE to focus on all of our capital projects and ensure that they are completed. There's also funding for police public works overtime, as well as increases for materials, fuel, chemicals at our wastewater treatment plant. Next, as it relates to livability and placemaking, we have added our public or Parks and Rec director from part-time to full-time now that there's been more emphasis on Parks and Recreation. There's been some funding for park attendance, which was not in the previous budget, as well as limited programming, and also funding for parks that is included in our CIP in the north side, and then the linear park safety improvements. So I want to include that there. Next, as it relates to economic development, there's funding for a part-time economic development manager, which will be focused on business recruitment and retention. And the goal is to reduce our tax burdens to our residents through proactive economic development efforts. And it supports the town council strategic plan goal, working towards Main Street status. And there's also continued funding for our marketing and tourism services. There is also a goal area for government performance, but due to some of the impacts to our budget, there are no highlights for government performance because we had to cut those out, understanding that some of the other priorities were more important. But there were some in there in our budget related to government performance, but they're not in this budget today. Next, as it relates to our budget highlights, you can see here the police sergeant, the police officer, the police parking attendant, and the economic development manager, which will all be included in our general fund, totals $176,520. And then the capital project coordinator, which is ARPA funded at $57,053. A little bit of a touch on what is not included in this budget at 78 cents. There's no dedicated funding towards our CIP. There's one officer that was not able to be funded. There's no funding for a beach ambassador program, which was a COVID program that was created with COVID funds in the previous fiscal year. There was no full funding for economic development position. There's no funding for support for a part-time position to address some of our sustainability and resiliency issues. No grant matching fund, and then there's no funding for our general government pay study. The police department had a pay study 2 years ago. The longer we delay a pay study for general government, the harder it will be to adjust based on market, and it will be more costly. And then finally, there's no funding for performance evaluation and hiring and onboarding system, which was something that would greatly increase our government performance internally.
This slide just kind of gives you some information on past budgets from 2021, what was adopted in this year, 22, and what we've actually amended. I'd like to draw your attention that we adopted a 7.75, and because of some of the new services and some of the projects we have put into place this year, we have amended that budget to 8.7. So the budget we're proposing tonight is at 8.8, which is fairly in line with what we're actually doing this year in this budget.
So in conclusion, our recommendation is to adopt the budget as presented with proposed 78-cent real estate tax rate or higher, which will not to exceed 80 cents, which was advertised should the council desire. Adopting a rate higher than 78 cents could provide additional funding towards our identified capital needs or towards more funding in terms of a COLA. But our recommendation today is at 78 cents. With our staffing of those core positions, the 2 for the police department, 1 for capital projects, part-time for economic development manager, 2% COLA for staff, and then a $1,500 stipend for essential worker pay related to the pandemic. And before we jump into the next steps, I really just wanted to thank our internal staff who have worked on this for the last few months, specifically our CFO, as well as our management fellow, Nisha in finance, our staff accountant Hope, and Adam Schaefer, our assistant director of finance. As we look at our next steps, we are here today at the 20th presenting our budget. On May 4th, we will have the public hearing on our budget, and then May 18th would be the public hearing, adoption on the tax rate, and the adoption of the budget. That concludes our presentation, and we'll take any questions that you may have or comments.
Any questions? No. We've been through it.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to state publicly that each of us have met with the town management and gone through this budget with a fine-tooth comb. And my analysis is, my opinion is that staff has done an excellent job. I still have concerns that the cost of living increase for staff is only 2%. That bothers me a little bit. I appreciate your recommendation that includes that. But we've got to keep our staff. Staff is, well, this will make staff a 3% increase. You know, our school teachers have gotten 11% school increase over the same time. Now, we have no control over how the school spends their budget. We have some control over how much we give them within the legislative guidelines. But I think our staff needs to be prioritized as we move forward if we're going to keep and hire and keep the best people possible.
I think one of the things that has come to light through this budget process is that we have been working in this really good position for the last couple years. I think it was the former mayor that had done a tax increase of 10 cents to get us to the 80. And he did that because we were running at a deficit. We were pulling funds over year after year. And part of that was because the budget process was backwards. And we were saying, what are our needs? And so we'll make the revenue, and that wasn't happening. And so we fixed that, we reversed that, took a lot of pain for Lisa through a lot of things. It's the correct way to do the budget process now, which is fantastic. And it's led to us being in the black year over a year. And I think that when I expected this year to come around, that we would be able to reduce this more than this budget proposal is. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions from citizens about why that isn't. And I had questions about that same aspect of it. It's because it doesn't seem sensible, right? We've been doing good, and then all of a sudden now what's happened? And the state mandates, I mean, I got an email from a resident that said, and it was forwarded from a state or a federal legislator, I think, from legislation, and that was saying, don't let inflation, let your local government tell you that they have to raise taxes. Like, what is that? Because that doesn't make any sense. Also, I will say that it is the state that is mandating almost $600,000 in increased expenditures at the local level. That state mandates, those are things that they decide in Richmond and then don't pay for. And then it trickles down to us and they say, well, you better be responsible for it, and you better pay for it, and you better do all of our programming in the way we want you to. And you know what? We're not gonna take the burden of raising the state tax rate. No, we're gonna say you have to figure that out at the local level. And then what are we supposed to do? And so, to be honest with you, it ticked me off a little bit, because that's just an unrealistic approach for somebody at that level that's bringing these mandates down to the local level and saying, we better pay for this, and then not funding it, and then telling us not to raise taxes when you have by law to have a balanced budget. I mean, the math doesn't make sense. So that's part of explaining this process to the public, because that was hard for me to understand as well. And when you have an increase of 22% over the one expenditure line item that is already the heaviest burden on your entire expenditure, then you weren't expecting that. There's no way we were preparing for a 22% increase in the biggest sector of expenditures that we have. That's just not something you would expect. And it's a mandate from the state. So in that respect, I think is very important that we get that understanding out into the community. There are people that see the budget presentation, and I'm sorry that so many people left, to be honest with you, although I know it's so hard to stay here this long, and I understand, like they say, get your point out in 10 minutes or less, because nobody's listening anymore. But this is the kind of information that people in the public need to understand in order to figure it out, in order to know the position we're put in as local officials and local elected people that are in charge of public funds that have legal requirements to them. And while we were in a place where we were able to start these other projects, get going on some things that people have been asking for years and years and years. And now we're like right back where we were because of state mandates. And I don't know how other localities are going to deal with this, to be honest with you. Other than, we're in this reassessment and we potentially could at least not raise the rate, but there are other localities, they're going to going through this budget process, it's gonna be very interesting how that goes out. And then we don't know yet what the state's doing because we don't have a final budget from the state. So there's all kinds of things there. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because it also struck me back. I thought we would be able to, equalize more. And I think that was something that I think everybody's been advocating for. There's nobody up here that doesn't want to advocate for that. My tax rate assessment on my business went up 49%. 49%. There is no equalization rate that will not affect me and my family directly. That will not be a burden to me and my family. So, there's, but we also have a duty to be responsible. And these things are part of the very hard part of being in this position sometimes. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about a little bit about my experience with the budget process so far. The staff has done a phenomenal job and really, I think in presenting it to council members and then presenting it tonight. And I hope maybe we can do a public post, maybe a Facebook forum or something where this presentation, because it was so late at night and it's after all of these other things, can get heard and out there because these are real requirements. This is real public money and we have to be responsible with it. And that's where there's a lot of things, there's no choices about a lot of these things. It's not like we got to pick to do something. And there's still so many things that we're not going to get to. And that's a reality as well. So, and I just appreciate our staff because I know Nate's yawning. I get it. Sorry. But it's, I don't get it.
My apologies.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I just needed to talk about that a little bit in some way. And I hope I need to keep talking about it. And unfortunately, what am I distracted with? But the risk of public health and welfare that is happening right now in our community. And I'm up at night, all night, searching legal code, the state code, trying to figure out what we can do. So, anyway, but that doesn't mean there's not enough attention on the budget too. So I'm going to tackle all that. But help the staff, help the town get this message out, this understanding out, the situation out, because that, I just hope I can call on citizens and, council members to explain this accurately and appropriately to help them understand this, because it's hard to understand if you don't talk about all of these state mandated things. And then you hear from the state level officials, don't let your local government raise taxes. Like, what is that? What is that? So, anyway. Yes.
This presentation will be on the website, but also don't forget to go to the YouTube channel where you can hear the verbal presentation behind it. And just fast forward till you get to the part about the budget. You don't have to sit through the whole meeting, but listen to this presentation from our YouTube channel. I also wanted to mention that I have spoken with the town manager about looking at there's a for retired people that are over a certain age and have a certain income and a certain limit on their assets. We have in place a sort of abatement program that reduces their taxes. And I would very much like to have staff look at that, how that might be adjusted a little bit, because from my conversations, there are people that really need that help that are just below the limits that are set there. I don't know if staff wants to comment on that or not, but it's something that we're also thinking about, those citizens that haven't gotten any income increase other than their little Social Security bump of 5% or whatever.
Yeah, we have discussed it. I've discussed it with a few council members. I don't even know when those limits were set on our senior discounts. But just in the last couple of years in my position where I've had to actually approve the senior discounts, there's been a few, and there was one memorable one for me where this married couple made $2,000 more than what our cap is. Yet I knew that they really could use those discounts, but I could not give it to them because our ordinance says you can't make more than this. And they were only $2,000 over, and I'm sure there's a lot of individuals in our community that would benefit from raising those limits so that they fall below them and they can get that discount.
You would think that whatever the cost of living increase was, that would be how much those limits would go up, at least.
Like I said, I don't know when they were set or when they've ever been looked at. I've only been in a position that I have to have dealt with real estate discounts and water sewer discounts for the last 2 years. But they haven't changed in the last 2 years, and we all know that the cost of living has gone up. So it is maybe something we do need to look at before the fiscal year starts.
I was gonna say, was that something, as long as we changed it by the fiscal year, then we could work on that program?
Yes.
That would be helpful. Very helpful.
I know someone who's looking at ordinances, so I think I'll work with them.
Yeah. that's right.
I just wanted to mention a couple things. First off, the school match that we keep being told is the dramatic problem with the budget. I believe that the 2.6 includes everything that the superintendent asked for, or did we cut anything out of that?
That 2.6 does not include the additional $125,000 for the additional executive director.
Okay.
And that's pretty much the only thing he asked us for above what we're required in our required level match.
Okay. And then other than that, I wanted to point out that back in the fiscal year 2019 and 2020 budget, we were at about 2.3 million for the schools. And then the next fiscal year, we were at 2.3. So it seems like to me, we should have planned for at least a little bit of increase over the last 4 years. I'm just a little concerned about that. And also the fact that our expenditures have gone up from 2019, 2020 budget from $7,074,078 to now $8,888,799. So that's close to a $1.8 million increase just since 2019. So I'm a little concerned that we're spending, we got a caviar taste on a beer bottle budget here. So I just wanted to, ensure that this isn't going to keep happening, because back in 2018, we needed all this extra money. And now here we are 4 years later, and we need a lot more money. And I just don't know if this is sustainable or not. I'm just really concerned that this is just going to keep happening over and over until we find other ways to fund our debts, our financial obligations. I mean, for one example, we don't regulate Airbnbs. We don't know how much money we're losing from those. And, there's other ideas. I think we just need to start thinking out of the box. This town cannot keep sucking the property owners dry. I mean, it's getting to the point where when I moved here in 2018, saw all these houses for sale, the realtor said, the reason why these houses are for sale is because the taxes just went up in 2018. All these people are leaving because of increased taxes. And here we go again. How many more people are we going to start losing because of the taxes? Just a few comments, but thank you.
Okay, I'd like to address some of that. Inflation has, it's on. Oh, you want to closer? Okay. Inflation is out of whack. And I usually don't, use terms like that. And none of us caused that. We all know that when we go to the grocery stores. I know there were 6 of us at the house at one point. There's 2 now. I know I'm spending more money than when the kids were home than that I didn't have to have at that point, if that makes sense. But we can't control the inflation that has occurred throughout everyone's lives at this point. the school, because that's what we're talking about, but so much of that to retain the teachers, their healthcare, the buildings that they're in. One building is over 30 years old. The other one is much newer, but there's a debt service on it. So, and we know the supplies that we have to get for our departments have gone up drastically. And no one expected all of that to happen. So I think this isn't going to be something permanent. I think that this too will pass like it passed in 1980. And that was probably the last time it was the worst, but I think we're dealing with it the best that we can. I don't think anybody is doing anything that they have to do it simply at this point in time. And that's just my opinion.
And I do share Mr. Williams' concern about diversifying our.
Concern. I mean, it really does.
It is, it's a huge
Bothering all
concern.
of us.
About diversifying though our revenue stream, I think that's key, and we now do require Airbnbs to get a business license and do require them to pay cottage tax. And so they indeed will now be captured. They should have been paying cottage tax before, but now they absolutely have to have a business license and they have to be paying cottage tax monthly. And that's not gonna make a dent in the overall big picture of this. You're talking about $600,000+ when a penny is $60,000. I mean, making up for that is just, it's just, we're still taking hundreds of $1,000s cuts out of the regular operating budget. I mean, that's the reality of this, is that the $600,000+ mandates not only ate up whatever growing room that we had, but then also then cut out operations of things that, from regular operating budget. And so that's what I learned through this process this year, and just what a burden those mandates are. And on top of that, I think that most of our departments, the entire department isn't but $100,000 or $200,000. So eliminating $650,000 or $700,000 is eliminating multiple entire departments of the town. And one, that's illegal. And number two is that what kind of service would we be providing at that point? I mean, I don't know, that would just dissolve, right? So, which I'm not suggesting to do. So, but anyway, it's been an enlightening process. And I do think that we should be diversifying our income, which is one of the things that is why we're talking about parking. Parking revenue is twice as much as our people tax. And as much as people don't or complain about parking revenue, the truth is that if you want to come up with $300,000, $400,000 more in real estate rate, that's what the parking is. So that would be another 6 or 7 cents. So I'm appreciative very much of everybody who pays for parking and takes that burden off of the real estate rate. Right. And you're right, Karen, people can watch it online, the YouTube channel. Since we're from my as well. All right, anything else on that? CIP?